This evening, we're going to cover those parts of the initiations that have been the way that the true inner and Rosicrucian order has given for the patterning of the preparation of initiates, of aspirants, for the awakening of the total personality, the control of this personality, and the attainment of the highest states of consciousness. Tonight we take up that part of the initiation or advancements which deals with the desire nature. That is the green sephira that you see there on the tree of life. And I want to remind you that the path of return has been so called because of the returning backwards, so to speak, from that which we came from. Involution is the descending of the primal will, the descending of consciousness, God, the all, into the 10 aspects of its own self-manifestation and the myriad self-experiences and self-expressions which are you and me and everything which exists. However, each one of these 10 aspects, remember, of consciousness, of God, which are called the 10 divine emanations, each one of them are a way that the divine self experiences the various portions of itself, and that's why the sephiras are called the spheres of activity, because it's through the activity that we become known to ourselves self-consciously. Now, the desire nature is one that has been so much misunderstood, especially, we feel, by the Eastern schools of thought, at least by most of them. And even in our Western schools of thought, the type of metaphysical teaching which we call the elementary metaphysics has given a tremendous amount of, shall we say, exaggerated focus on just what we call the desire nature without taking into the full comprehension the other aspects of selfhood. You can't, and I'm sure many of you have learned this by now, you can't merely take certain desires and then go to work on them like you are taught to do in elementary metaphysics in order to, shall we say, make demonstrations. I think this is the usual term that's used. And figure, I am leading a spiritual life. This is just one of the powers of consciousness. And indeed, it's a power that has other meaning than most of us give it, than we could even begin to understand. So we are going to show you through the paths of return with their connections just what the significance can and should be, and explain to you what it is that is awakened, heightened, intensified for you when and if you prepare yourselves for this deeper and more intensive work of our order, just what it is and how it is that the desire nature actually is, how it functions in its relationship with the rest of our personality and being. And of course we cannot do this completely, but we'll give you the highlights that are necessary for now, at any rate. Recall, then, that we started off with what we call the physical universe, the bottom sephira, called the zealoter, in which the full significance of what the physical universe actually happens to be isn't really developed yet, because that you don't have until you get to the top again, actually. But it has started. Inklings have come. Seeds have been planted. A new reaction, a new response to that which we call earth, to that which we call form. And a new attitude at least has begun in relation to our own vehicle, which, remember, is part of the divine form of God. This, incidentally, is vitally important, our attitude to our own vehicles. We can't go around looking out and saying, oh, God's world is beautiful, the mountains, the trees, the stars, the this, the that, and then say about ourselves, oh, how I hate my body. That is the closest part of your vehicle expression. And whether you feel your body is too fat or too thin or too straight or too round, or whether you feel your coloring is too light or too dark, remember that is your feeling about it. And this has to do with the sephira we're going to consider tonight. And in actuality, God apparently loves himself just as much fat as thin. Otherwise, no one would ever fall in love with the plump kind. And no one would fall in love with the thin types. And the mother and father surely loves the baby, whether it's a thin baby or a fat baby. Types are types. There are some flowers that are big and some that are little. Some are very complex and some seem to be very simple, though everything is complex in a sense when it comes to a vehicle. So it's very, very important to retrain our attitudes towards our vehicle. And this is where we come to the first path that leads to the sephira, which you see there called Netzach, victory. Is victory the name they give it on this tree? We have umpteen names, and I never remember whether this is the one that has that particular group of definitions, because we have about 8 or 10 different trees. Each of them give you another aspect and another name of the same sephira. Don't let it frighten you. It's very easy when you take it week by week, truly. Well, remember, first we want to remind you just what modus operandi we've been utilizing here, so that you'll see why, in case you've forgotten. We go to that path that leads from the physical universe to the desire nature, that is victory, from Malkuth to victory. That is, as you sit on your right-hand side, that path that connects there, and that, incidentally, is the path of Kof. In your tarot, it is called the moon. We want to remind you then that you've been traveling, or we've been traveling together, from number 10, Sephira, to number 9, Sephira, which is foundation, to number 8, Sephira, which is Hod, that's the intellect. Here I think it's called splendor. And now we're considering the sephira, which is assigned to the desire nature, called victory. Now, we again want to remind you that we took it through the paths and connections. In getting from the 10th to the 9th, remember, we took the last tarot key. That's the 21st tarot key. And that is called, actually, the 32nd path of wisdom, though it's tarot key number 21. And then, in order to get to the next sephira, that is, to the one that is assigned to the intellect, to your orange circle, remember, we returned to the 10th sephira, the physical universe. And first we traversed that path which connects the physical universe to the intellect. We want to remind you that we pointed out at the time your mind directly controls your body in this manner that you can say, I wish to lift my hand, or I wish to push this furniture around, and so on, so that you have conscious control of certain parts of your physical activity at all times. And this is just one of the many elements that are involved here. And then, because there are more than one path we must traverse to get to that orange circle, remember, then we entered into foundation, which we were able to do having already been advanced into that sephira. And we took the next tarot key. The 20th tarot key, remember, is the one that connects the physical universe to the intellect. Then it is the 19th tarot key, called the sun, that connects subconsciousness, or that which we call foundation, to the intellect. And so there you have your connection. Then there's the full advancement actually into the element, which is water, in connection with the intellect, the flow of consciousness, the watery, subtle substance of being. Now then, the next tarot key going backwards after the 19th, remember, would be the 18th tarot key called the moon. I hope you know your tarot well enough to follow it in your mind. And when you do, you'll see how simple the whole procedure actually is to understand, even though it may be difficult to attain, at least in spots. So now the 18th tarot key is the next tarot key which indicates the inner subtle forces. Remember, the inner subjective forces of consciousness, which have to do with the relationship between the vehicle, both your own personal vehicle and your desire nature, as well as that larger vehicle, your environment and the universe itself, to the desire nature of life or the world or the universe. So the aspirant, having open access to all those sephirot from number 8 and below, you see, 10, 9, 8 has already been traversed. We're now dealing with number 7, which is the green one, the desire nature, is now preparing himself or being prepared to awaken those parts of the nature and the controls and the awarenesses that have to begin with the connection between the physical vehicle and the desire nature. So we have tarot key number 18 to consider in these terms, in terms of the advancement. Now, how shall we consider it here? For one thing, you want to notice that the 18th tarot key, which is called the moon, those of you who've reached that in your tarot work at home will be familiar with this, is that which symbolizes the corporeal intelligence, it is said. Now that means actually the intelligence of the consciousness of the cells, the actual cells. You know, your cells, the cells of your body are really little consciousnesses. You have something like 20 or 30 trillion of them, incidentally. And they are each a little consciousness. And together they make up the consciousness of your particular vehicle, which is under your domain and control during a physical incarnation. This, incidentally, is how you are helping those elements of divine consciousness to evolve. They are under your direction, whether you are conscious of it or unconscious of it. If you are upset, you are impinging this disturbance on each one of those little animals, shall we call them, which make up your body. If you are joyous, you are impinging on them. If you are full of love, you are impinging the love upon these little consciousnesses. And so everything you are in terms of a human being, everything you think and feel and do, is in continuous relationship with those some 20, 30 trillion beings who die continuously. After something like 9 to 10 months, there isn't a single one of those cells which you had 10 months ago, which you still have. They die and they're reborn. They die and they're reborn. You live through death, through the death of the smaller consciousnesses. Not that they can die, but their little vehicles are shed and eliminated, but they go on in the mineral, the aspect of the universe where we say everything that is eliminated is merely reabsorbed into the earth, reshaped. We put manure, for instance, around plants to make them grow. They keep intermingling at all times. Nothing can actually be destroyed, but it can break down from the form that is being held. And another replica of it takes its place. Now, incidentally, it is because of the breakdown of these cells that we cast off and new ones which are replaced. It's because of this that it is possible for us to change our emotional response to life and our thinking aspect to life. Were it not for that, we couldn't change. we'd really be stuck. And I mean stuck. We'd be frozen, stiff, in one form of thinking, of feeling. It's through change that we live. It's through death that we grow. And we have to bring this in here because in that particular tarot key, we are dealing with a phase which is never been fully utilized by aspirants as it should be. And the beginnings of this, of course, is started when the aspirant is advanced in this particular grade. Because this corporeal intelligence, as it is called in Kabbalah, and this particular tarot key is indicating what? It's indicating evolution. And it's referring, incidentally, to the evolution of the vehicle, specifically, quite specifically. That's why in that tarot key, you notice you have the pool. That's out of which all things come. Remember that the mind, the objective intellectual mind, is referred to the element of water. We took that up last week. And so out of the pool, and literally speaking, out of the ocean of this particular planet, came the beginnings of life, of the vehicle type of life. And from this pool, if you will recall, comes what looks like a crayfish crawling up out of the pool. And then you have a wild wolf, and then a dog, and then a couple, and there's a path leading upwards. And then there are these towers showing human evolution, indicating the human, and then on up the mountain to the top of the mountain, which is the full attainment. So the vehicle is being very particularly stressed, again, in this particular advancement. And in essence, the connection is being made in the subtle force, through your own subtle forces when you take the advancement that involves this. The connection is being made to help awaken you to the significance of your desires and your emotional makeup in terms of your body. Of course, now we don't have to plead with anyone to think, to meditate, to reason this out, because modern science has come to the rescue quite recently and informs us that every emotional attitude immediately affects the body. And then the science of psychosomatics has come into effect, although it isn't quite such a science, because they really don't understand yet just what and why the emotions can do what they can do. But the occultist learns to know, and know not as theory, but by direct experience. And particularly this kind of knowing is started in the advancement into this grade. In this way, one becomes more aware of the effect of the emotions on the body. You see, usually we aren't quite aware of it. We notice it later, if we notice it at all. We look back with our minds and we say, my goodness, why is it that my digestion got upset? Or why is it I suddenly got a backache, or came down with this pain, or that pain, or this problem? And we start looking back in order to try to find the reason. That is, those of us who've become familiar with metaphysical thought. To find the reason, and the trouble is, the reason usually escapes us because we have not yet become aware of the subtleties of the emotional makeup and the desire nature. And so, just as often as not, we pick the wrong reasons. Well, with this type of stimulus that we're given in the ritual ceremonial intensification, because of those who've gone before us, and the whole linkage that keeps us solid and keeps us, you might say, in a continuous stream of contact right up to the most complete knowingness that exists in the universe, in these graded consciousnesses that we are linked with. Because of this, an ability to really ferret out the real reactions on the body and the more subtle ways that the emotions can affect the body, this starts to develop. This starts taking place, though with some it will happen far more quickly than with others. As we have told you many a time, it varies with every aspirant, and it varies a great deal. Now remember, in the previous grade, we were pointing out that the mental patterns, that is, the attention of the mind, affects the body directly, as well as the subconsciousness directly. And it is, of course, far more easy to find where our self-conscious attention has brought about attitudes or effects than it is to find out about the deeper emotional elements in our lives. And certainly we should be familiar with this. For example, I don't know if I mentioned it to this particular group, but a bunch of psychiatrists met recently who had been studying married couples who were all past middle age, all had had a long marriage, and all had been fighting like cats and dogs throughout the marriage. In other words, they were very unhappy married couples, miserably unhappy ones, and had been coming for psychiatric help or aid in various ways. So a study was made of quite a large number of these couples, and they arrived at the conclusion that these particular couples married each other to begin with, stayed with each other, and fought with each other because this is exactly what they desired. And that many of them said, well, I'm only staying with him because of the children. They said they've discovered that never was a marriage kept together because of the children. This may surprise you, but at least this is what they said. Their researches into the real deeper motivations found that in actuality these people wanted and needed sparring partners. And though they fought and kept talking about divorce, there was an unconscious agreement between them that it's just talk. And neither of them would have dreamed of taking any action, because the actual need was for a sparring partner, and they each fulfilled the other perfectly. Now, would these couples know it? No, they would not know it. So they fight merrily along, living an unhappily happy life. Now, of course, the point is, they are unhappy. But their fulfillment comes through being unhappy. And incidentally, this is the problem with practically all of us, if we but knew it. How is this so? Well, you've heard us speak many a time about the hidden guilts that we walk around with. Well, we have so many guilt complexes hidden way deep down that we go around pretty sure that we don't deserve being happy. A part of us wants to be happy. There's another part of us says, I don't really deserve it. And this is usually underneath. So we pick from underneath those conditions, those situations, and those habitual emotional attitudes which will bring us our frustrations and our unhappiness. And we do this without realizing what we're doing. It isn't that we all don't want to be happy. Of course we all want to be happy. But the point is, which do we want to be more, happy or unhappy? That's where the problem comes in, you see. And most of us, unfortunately, at least at times, want to be unhappy. And so this is how our emotions get pulled towards people. You know, you cannot force an attraction between people, no matter how much you try. Any true occultist will tell you that though there are many things which are under our control and must come under control, and they must, the one thing you will never really control is who you're going to be attracted to, basically, because that attraction is in terms of what you are totally underneath at the time. Now, you may be attracted to one type of person today, and next month or next year, not hesitate to wish the person would drop dead. You know, we've heard it, you've seen it, and then feel guilty because you want him to drop dead. And that creates more problems. But, you see, we can control disliking people. We can make ourselves love others in this impersonal loving, which is kind and full of goodwill. But personal attractions are pretty much like chemicals. There are some chemicals, when the minute they get together, they'll rush. You know, you put them within any area where they can magnetically feel each other, and they rush together and form a compound. Scientists even say they get married. They say elements get married and form various compounds. And it's true, that's exactly what they do. Various types of atoms rush together. They get married. And there are other elements, other types of atoms, which you put them in each other's vicinity, and you know what happens? An explosion. Exactly the opposite of rushing together. There's a whoosh, and I mean a bang, and a lot of destruction. Now, this doesn't mean that these chemicals are evil. They're just not attracted to each other. In fact, they're attracted so much in reverse that you have your explosions. That's how man makes these beautiful spiritual things with which to legally murder his fellow man, you know. All these explosives. I'm very almost bitter about that. The way man deals death to man. He does research into the miracle of the elements. And then he very proudly takes these elements, which he knows will explode, and he arranges them in such a way so that they'll explode his fellow brother, at least out of an incarnation at any rate. And then he thinks, and then he prays to his God and says, God, let our side win. You know, real spiritual. Well, using this principle that way, of course, is just an indication of the unevolved level of consciousness, which is sad. Still, it will grow. There's one thing we can guarantee you, no matter how young anyone or anything is, time will grow it. You know, you outgrow youth. And this is the thing that we have to bear in mind. But in terms of attraction, then, whatever total chemical you happen to be, mentally and emotionally, at the time, this is what determines who and what you're going to be attracted to. And that is why you cannot determine who you will fall in love with. You know, because that is, that has a life of its own. For whatever period of time you and the other individual form a harmony of attraction, whether it be to make each other miserable. This is a harmony of attraction, because you're fulfilling each other, or to make each other truly joyous and help each other to attain to the higher levels of consciousness. Now, in this particular path that we are discussing, the path of Kof, we learn to deliberately work with our desires and our emotional nature in order to change the chemical elements in our vehicles, because attractions have to do not just with the mind, not just with the emotions, and not just with the body. They have to do with all of us. The physical body, the subconsciousness, the intellect, and the emotional desire nature. All of them are, and together, are involved in what we will attract to us or what we will be attracted to, whether it be in terms of people or environment. It's all together. So in this particular path, we're dealing with that effect on the vehicle. And as we change or become aware of just what we've been doing with our emotions, and start changing our emotional responses and our desires, we have an influence upon the physical vehicle directly. The chemistry changes. The chemistry is in continuous change. If somebody gets very mad, they've taken tests. They've discovered that there's the most astonishing change in the whole chemistry of the body. All the glands, everything goes into a state of function where they send out all kinds of subtle and vital elements into the bloodstream. And you know very well that when you are in a state of sort of euphoria, feeling happy and loving, and isn't everything nice, that your face is more beautiful. I mean, even there's an immediate and direct effect on the physical vehicle itself. Because don't forget, the physical vehicle is the consciousness of God on a particular vibrational level. We've got to keep that in mind at all times. So here we have the change that we start bringing about in the actual chemistry of the cells of the brain, the glandular system, the cell consciousness, the 20, 30 trillion little animules who work for us incessantly. We deal particularly there, and we start becoming aware of what the emotions do to the actual body itself, both in its inner chemistry and in its outer appearance. Then the next step that must be taken, you see, this is an advancement that has actually 4 factors involved. If you'll notice, when we went from Malkuth to Yesod, there was just one path to be traversed, and then the actual entry into Yesod, foundation, that's subconsciousness. When we went into splendor, dealing with the orange one, the intellect, you'll notice there we had 2 paths plus the Sephira itself, which had 3 factors. Now, dealing with the emotional desire nature, there are 3 paths plus the advancement into the actual Sephira, because the paths involved are the one we've just been discussing, and then the next one, you see, this is Tarot Key 18. It's there. The next one backward is Tarot Key 17, and that connects foundation, that is subconsciousness, with the desire nature, that is victory. You see, we're still going in an orderly manner on the paths of return for the awakening and the stimulus of those parts of our nature which need to be brought into harmony. So, with Tarot Key number 17, remember, this Tarot Key is assigned to what? To meditation. And here we come to another element which we're all familiar with, but which needs tremendous stimulus and awakening. What we feel and what we desire is really, incidentally, our real meditation. I don't know how much you have noted this, but this is a real meditation. In all the things you may have read about meditation, the one thing I'm sure you've become aware of, and it is this, that you are told to still the mind, quiet the mind, quiet the mind. As long as you're busy thinking, you're not meditating. Of course, if you're busy just feeling, you're not meditating exactly in the way that the occultist is training you, but you are meditating unconsciously. That's the point. The occultist is being trained how to meditate consciously. But all of us are in a continuous state of unconscious meditation, our participation with the Lord of Life. And what is it that we usually are meditating on? Well, you have your connection there. You know that subconsciousness holds the patterns of everything we've thought, everything we've felt, all the ways we've reacted. The entire patterns of response to life reside there in subconsciousness. And subconsciousness, remember, received it from the intellect. That's the orange one. You can see the path that connects it, the channel of force, and from the desire nature, the green one. Also, of course, from the yellow circle above, which we are not considering this week. We're going to consider that next week and really come out with the most potent of techniques for helping to bring about that balancing of the personality. But tonight, what we want to do is understand more fully the connections between the desire nature and these other parts of ourselves, and how, on the path of return, these are stimulated and what it is meant to do when they're stimulated and awakened. So here you see this meditation, as shown by the 17th tarot key, connecting the emotional desire nature with the subconsciousness, is telling us a story of how things are. But of course, in the advancement through this particular path, one is being stimulated to become aware of what it is that we're doing. Now, we'll give you a few incidents or examples of how it is that we're always meditating unconsciously, and thereby often exactly negating the things we're consciously working on, which we do through our unconscious meditation. For example, let's take fear. This is an emotion, isn't it? Now remember, that's the emotional element in our work, along with the desire nature. Let's take fear. All right, now, suppose you're going to school and you're going to have an examination. And you're full of fear because you figure you haven't studied well enough. I suppose all of us sometime or other have done this. You can come down with a cold or the flu, or you can break your leg. I mean, you can do all kinds of things to keep yourself from having that test. Now, the reason it happened is because that was your unconscious meditation, your fear. It was your way of avoiding something you were afraid of. And subconsciousness is the foundation, remember, for everything that occurs on the physical universe. That's why it's called foundation. Therefore, your very fear put the pattern right into subconsciousness, which it already had, because you were feeding it a continuous stream of anxieties in all sorts of other ways. So that when the real test came, subconsciousness went to work and fulfilled your desire. You notice it's called victory. Your emotions are always victorious. That's a potent statement. You better remember it. Why do you think the desire emotional nature is called victory? It's not what you think consciously that's always victorious. It's what you feel that's always victorious. You bring into your experience everything you meditate on as an habitual feeling. The whole secret of attainment, really, is involved in knowing with the emotions, though you cannot know properly with the emotions unless you also work with the discrimination of your intellect. So we are not downgrading the intellect. Without the intellect, you become nothing but an ungoverned emotional savage. The intellect is what keeps guiding and directing, and we'll show you that more when we come to the last connecting path. You see the 16th tarot key, the tower, connects the intellect with the desire nature, the orange with the green. That's the third path that we will discuss in the traversing of the paths of return. So you have your exact connection there that will be stimulated and set up. But here what we want to try to understand is that which we feel is really the secret kind of desire that we're not conscious of, in a sense. Also, the habitual, unconscious way of reacting in the lower mass mind levels of our emotions. And so, the problems that we have, the illnesses we suffer from, and we all do, the frustrations that come to us, the tears and the tragedies which we all experience. These we have because we have not yet evolved to a point where we direct with our objective mind the type of emotional, continuous meditative flow that we want to bring into our experience. And furthermore, we cannot really do this completely, thoroughly, without bringing in the higher elements, that is, bringing in the hierarchy of consciousness to our aid. As long as we think of ourselves as separate human beings, relying on our own little mind, on our own little personality, we're doomed to fail. We will try 1,000 times to hold a positive emotion, and if we hold it 2 minutes, we're lucky. Instantly, we find the emotions being pulled back down. Haven't you found it so? You know that it's so. It's immediately pulled back down. And it isn't that we haven't tried. It's just that we haven't been utilizing the powers from above as we need to. Well, all of us can utilize the powers from above at all times up to a point. But to get the most intensive help of the powers from above, this is what is aimed at in the traversing of these paths through the ceremonial ritual methods that have been given us. Because don't forget, we keep getting linked up on this hierarchy with those who've already accomplished it, so that we're not being washed as completely and consistently by this, shall we say, flooding river of emotions. We're linking ourselves. It's like being in a train that is going very fast, and the tracks maybe are kind of rough and it's swaying back and forth. You have a strap to hang on to when you're linked with those higher hierarchical levels. And that is why you're able to accomplish so much more. Now then, and then also incidentally, that is one of the primary reasons that the masters gave us the tarot, because it was found that just trying in an objective manner to grab an emotion, it just doesn't work. You have to be able to grab something concrete and specific to symbolize it, so that there's no chance for the thought or the emotion to slide, so that like a lightning flash, that of course we'll discuss more later, you have a symbol to suggest instantly an opposite state of emotion and tune you right in to the help that comes from above. Now, as you have heard me say often, the secret of everything, of course, is in learning how to say, God lives me. That's the whole secret. And it's a simple one. But it isn't simple to accomplish. That's the whole problem. Our emotions are not going to be falling down continuously into these negative areas of fear, of insecurity, of jealousy, of envy, of suspicion, of hatred, in the realms of ignorance and so on. They're not going to do this so consistently when we have trained them to hang on to the path and the sephira which join them. And this is what you're trained in the deeper work. This is what you're being trained in. You're being trained in all the preliminaries, step by step, for just this. But you see, when instantly all you have to do is flash into your mind, and in time you get to know it, the picture of the sephirah. Your subconsciousness knows all the meanings of the tarot keys, of the sephirah, that is, their spheres of activity, of the connecting paths, because week by week you've been learning it, and then you've been going through it in its intensification. Just the very grabbing of that pattern instantly makes subconsciousness remember what its positive stimulus has been, and instills into it the opposite effect, that is the control that we require. I see that it is almost time for our little 5-minute intermission, So let's have a few announcements, and then we'll have our intermission, then we'll continue with tonight's. And incidentally, still with that particular path we've been discussing, I'd like you to look back in your own minds, because it's important to see just what's involved with this unconscious meditation. Then we'll go on to the next path. All of us have at times had a very bad cold, been feeling miserable, ill, either seriously or not so serious, but seriously enough to be quite miserable. Now, can you look back in your memory and recall somebody said, well, how are you feeling today? Your tone of voice, well, I think maybe I'm a little better. And that, if you're trying to portray the brave soul under terrible hardship, which is meditating on still being under terrible hardship, mind you. Now, how many of you, and perhaps most, maybe even all, have at least at times had someone say, gee, you're looking better, I'll bet you're well. Have felt insulted?
Yeah.
The idea. No, I'm not better. Last night I had this symptom and that and the other, huh? You see the subtleties that are involved. A little example like that often tells more than perhaps anything else. And the same is true of our feelings in terms of relationships, you know. The brooding, like, I'm so lonely, I want to be loved. Why can't I have loyal friends? Why do people betray me? Boy, what a meditation. Wow. And you get it, don't you? Victory. You're always victorious. That's the thing. Always victorious. Now then, the next stimulus, the next awakening, the next connection that we're trying to awaken into your conscious awareness has to do then with the path that goes from Hod, splendor, to Netzach, victory. And this is the next spot then, symbolically, that the aspirant who is traveling the grades of return is placed in. And remember, the intellect, this is objective analysis, the ability that has been stimulated for a better seeing, a better controlling, a better objective awareness, which brings discrimination. That path of return now, that's the first cross path, notice. There are 3 cross paths on that tree, and that's the first one. And those cross paths are tremendously, tremendously important for developing the balance in the nature. The ability to balance the both polarities, because each of the sides of the tree, remember, are the polarity elements. The pillar of mercy and the pillar of severity. And in the middle, the pillar of mildness. This is the balancing factor. But you don't develop that balancing factor except ye have crossed the paths to bring about into the awareness, the partnership between the mind and the emotions, the conscious partnership. And most of us are usually in conflict, you know, in relation to our minds and our emotions. We want consciously one thing, and unconsciously we keep ourselves in trouble. So you see, this is the conflict goes on all the time. Well, notice the path that crosses it. Incidentally, this is the path of Mars. And that's the 16th tarot key. We continue to go in an orderly direction, backwards, the path of return, backwards and inwards. This is the tarot key, the Tower. Tarot key number 16, assigned to Mars. It's red, and it's potent. It's assigned to many, many things. And we couldn't begin to cover all the elements that it stirs into stimulus. But we are going to try to bring out those things which are important for us right now, anyway, as a beginning. Now, You see, it is when your conscious mind learns how to look and watch that it becomes aware of all these subtleties. And then it starts seeing these patterns. And remember the tower that those two figures are thrown out of on that tarot key. That tower, these are the fast habit patterns. These are the habitual reactions, the thinking and the feeling that we have become frozen in, like the people who are either Republicans or Democrats because it was good enough for Pa and for his Pa and his Pa before him is good enough for me, or because I happen to read this newspaper. So we follow this particular group of ideas because the newspaper says so. I mean, we get frozen in patterns and we're not open. We're locked up in those towers. And so this is aimed at knocking us loose, developing in us a willingness to let anything that we hold on to, whether we think it's a principle or not, to be willing to let it go if it isn't in accordance with the true laws of the universe. To be willing to be shown, no matter how it has to be shown. To be willing to be thrown out of towers, to feel ourselves in this very chaotic and very disturbing condition, because it's disturbing to lose our little safe patterns. We think they're safe, though they're not. These patterns we think are so safe are the things that are actually the very things that get us into trouble. Our habitual, unconscious feeling elements. And our thinking has not been aware of just what the power involved happens to be. Now then, the connection then that's made between the objective watcher and discriminator and thinker with this emotional nature, these desire drives, gives us an added power once we've traversed this path, the power to start reversing our habitual states, which have been negative and not in harmony with the universal growth, the law of evolution. And it needs a tremendous power. That's why this is the path of Mars. This is the volitional, the vital, driving element in our natures. This is just one of the factors with this particular path. And how is it that we do it? Well, of course, it seems like a simple answer when we say to you, the way we do it is, for instance, if we keep saying, God, I'm so lonely, I want to be loved. If instead of that, we say, oh, God is so good, just look at all the beautiful people, I love people, I love people. It sounds kind of simple, but it isn't simple to accomplish, and we've explained that to you. To reverse the habitual feeling. Actually, it's also reversing our expectation. And expectation, remember, is in the emotions. Nevertheless, it has to be guided by the intellect. We have to become so aware of the way our emotions flow that we can instantly, when we discover, just like as fast as a lightning flash, incidentally, we have to be able to instantly reverse the emotional response which is negative, whether it be jealousy, whether it be fear, whether it be yearning. And yearning, incidentally, is all right provided we know what to yearn for and how to yearn. Most of us yearn in such a way as to announce to ourselves that we are empty. We yearn to have something that somebody else has or something similar to it. Or if we see a couple who seem to be happy and in love, we yearn to have love. Well, this yearning is really an announcement to ourselves that we haven't got it, and it's a negative emotional usage, you see. That's why you've heard it said so often, believe that ye have received it, and ye shall have it. Yet it goes against the objective seeing, doesn't it? To be able to say to ourselves, I am rich in love, when perhaps no one has even bothered to call us or care about seeing us for several weeks or months, it sounds to us like maybe we would be lying to ourselves. Well, we would be lying to ourselves if we just say that to ourselves. What we have to do is start feeling it in terms of from within out in order to make the circuit and to balance off the return elements in the way that we want them to balance back into our lives for our own experiencing. The thing that's again involved here, incidentally, is the sex energy. You see, this is the Mars center, as we mentioned. And of course, curiously enough, most of the troubles we get into is really involved with the frustrations of that very Kundalini sex energy, believe it or not, which does not mean, and we hasten to tell you this, which does not mean that we say to you, go out and stop being frustrated on these sexual levels. That is what some people who don't stop to think would try to interpret our little remark as being, but it isn't that. You see, until we learn how to let God do the feeling in and through us, to give ourselves to love, and therefore receive love from the level of God, this energy, which is the driving energy of the universe, it's the energy which we think with, it's the energy we feel with, it's the energy we live with, it's the energy that drives us in all ways. On the physical plane, it is the energy which drives us into the reproductive aspect of the sex function. On the emotional plane, it drives us into the attractions and repulsions. On the mental plane, it drives us into those things that interest us mentally. And the point is this: that which we are not being emotional about, that which we do not desire, we cannot keep our mind focused on, and vice versa. You see, that's where we get into such dilemmas. If you're bored or not interested, if you're bored with arithmetic, you can go to school and they'll try to teach you arithmetic, but you're not going to concentrate, because you're not going to be interested enough. It's your emotions and your feelings which give the interest. And because most human beings have not yet transmuted these sex drives into that recognition that it's the divine that guides and expresses and lives and controls this drive, these particular drives then go off into backward motion. That is why, for instance, in this culture, and I think it is tragic, everywhere you turn, you notice there's a deliberate attempt to titillate the imagination in terms of the purely physical level of sex, which is just being pure animal and worse than animal, really, because with the animal it's innocent and beautiful. But with the human being, you're supposed to have your feeling of reverence. As you recall, we spoke to you about the vital importance of transmuting our emotional attitudes and our mental attitudes towards this particular drive. And as long as we have not done that, you see, what our emotions will do, they'll keep going off into negative realms automatically, just automatically, as long as we continue the dirty-minded attitude towards union, as long as we insist on looking upon it as just an appetite, like having to breathe or drink or eat food, as long as it's something to leer about and whisper about and snicker at, we are giving our subconsciousness, we are giving our total energy drive a perversion. And so our whole lives go into perverted responses in every way, through the thinking, the feeling, everything. Because this is the energy of unity. God is love. And what is love? Love is unity. And here you have the one of the primary reasons for so many of the problems that face humanity. And it doesn't matter how old or how young we are, remember. We're talking about the attitude. It's the attitude that brings the frustrations, not whether we have a mate or not. I know some think, well, naturally I'll be frustrated, I haven't got a mate. If you have the proper reverential attitude, if you transmute your thinking, feeling responses to this particular type of drive, if you need a mate, you'll attract it. Your entire meditation then, as we pointed out from the previous path, will be in terms of that which will bring the beauty and the fulfillment, if you really need it at this time of your evolution. Not everybody needs a mate at a particular period. We have got times when we need to concentrate more on other factors, though the time comes when we all, incidentally, as we go through evolution, will have and must have the perfect mate. That, incidentally, is part of the victory, the true victory of God and of life. And it might interest you to know that that green circle is assigned to the sphere of the activity of Venus, you see. And what is Venus but love? And therefore it is love which does the transmuting. Love and love alone. And love is what makes holy. Love is what makes sacramental. And from that, then, the mind can learn to start directing in the positive ways in order to bring about that harmony between what we want consciously and what we feel and therefore create. We must get knocked out of these false towers, these prejudices, the old hatreds. We must either knock ourselves out, or life will knock us out sooner or later, of the feeling, when I was a little girl I suffered so much, or when I was a little boy I was so misunderstood, or when I was married I had such a hellish time. You know, this self-pity about what was. We must overturn these emotions, because if we don't, we'll keep having the same patterned experiences. And it needs the mind to become aware of what we're doing, to help us keep overthrowing. And that's the intent of this particular connection that is made in the subtle inner levels when the advancement goes through that particular path, to give you the greater ability and capacity to overthrow those old and negative and immature responses from yesterday, and also to become positive in your expectations for today and tomorrow, knowing that everything you expect you're going to get. Everything. Sometimes it takes many years. And the thing that can make us at least feel hope is that it doesn't matter, incidentally, how negative we have been regarding yesterday. It doesn't matter. If we change it, we can overthrow yesterday's karma. And this is another thing that this path is aimed at helping us to do. Today we are making tomorrow's karma. It doesn't matter what you have been and done. It doesn't matter what mistakes you've made. If you can really apply your full thinking, feeling process, which naturally involves then the subconscious and the body, all these paths are involved. If you can really apply yourself to those positive connections, and therefore to the positive turning of your powers in the direction of evolution, you overthrow the negative experiences that you will inevitably have tomorrow. You will overthrow it into positive and expanding and fulfilling experiences by doing and awakening and feeling and thinking and aspiring in terms of the full grades of the work, right from the very first, when you get your lessons at home, down on through each of the various levels of our work. This is the hope of the world, that you can do this. We don't say it's easy, but what we say is it is doable. And believe you me, if you want to look back at your lives, you know that it's well worth doing. You don't want to keep repeating all that nonsense, do you now? You don't want to keep picking the wrong person and the so-called wrong friends, though they never were wrong, mind you. You've been fulfilling yourself. You've been victorious. But let's be victorious consciously and in terms of the higher aspirations, so that we can become masters, as we must become sooner or later. First, masters of our personality powers, little by little, and then of the greater things. So then, following these three linkages that have been made to add to the power, there's the actual entry then into the Sephira called victory, Netzach, and this grade, incidentally, is called philosophus. Now, why philosophus? Remember, in Malkuth, the so-called physical plane, told you it was called zealoter. You develop a zealousness of aspiration as you start concentrating on what the physical universe really is and is not. In the next grade, you're called theoricus, that you're trained in certain theories relating to the powers of subconsciousness. And don't ever forget that the powers of subconsciousness come from your conscious mind, or the joint part of your mind, which is your intellect and your emotions. They're not really separate, you know. We think they are, but they're not. Even being bored is an emotional something. If the mind is bored, they work together continuously. They are inseparable twins. There's no such thing as really pure mind without emotion, or pure emotion without mind. And even though they're separated, remember they're one, interpermeated, back and forth, influencing at all times through that path, that cross path of Pe, of Mars, of the tower. So the entry then into philosophus, we said, why philosophus? In the previous one, it was practicus, where you start practicing these theories. And in philosophus, by now you're supposed to really develop a philosophy of life which is something more than you think. All of us, if we were asked, what is your philosophy? We would be able to start giving a metaphysical or occult explanation, perhaps, about what our philosophy actually is. But it would be more or less vague. In philosophus, what is really attempted and meant to occur, and does eventually, though with some it takes a very long time, is that the philosophy of life becomes automatically in tune with the way things really are. You see, some people have a materialistic philosophy. Well, their philosophy is in tune with the way things are not. Lots of us think we have a spiritual philosophy, a metaphysical, an occult philosophy. Well, we have with a part of us, but not with another part. It's when your emotions, remember, this is the emotional desire nature, it's when your emotions automatically feel and respond to that philosophy of, I was never born, I will never die. Desires, emotions are victorious. I'm aware of them. I train them. I direct them. My subconsciousness is the foundation for my environment. The God self, the higher self, is in complete charge of all these elements. When this is something you feel as a continuous, consistent thing, then you really and completely have that philosophy. Now you're really working at incorporating it into your being. You never really know a thing or have a thing, we repeat, until you have it with your emotions. And so this, then, is the last of the first four grades that deals with the personality, with the actual personality. Next Thursday, we take up that part of our makeup which deals with our higher mind, our true soul, as separate from the vital soul, which the subconsciousness is, the sort of animal soul, which we share with all life below us. We take up those powers, those higher powers, which really direct these personality powers, and the whole training, incidentally, in effect, is to bring the control from that higher level. And all of this is really preparatory awakening in order to have the channels open for that control to become truly conscious and from the level of that which we will discuss next Thursday evening, the Christ self, the true Adam, that in us which is the real I, and we will show you in terms of the paths just how you can more readily bring that awareness into yourselves. I think we'll give you a technique then, although we might let it wait till the following week, we'll see, to help you with that particular thing. All right, now then we will have questions. You mean where somebody just suddenly breaks down physically, or what?
Not necessarily, the whole world falls apart. So
Oh, where suddenly they get hit with...
they're thrown out of the tower.
Yeah, they're suddenly thrown out of the tower. Yes, well, no matter how nice a person is, and really, we're all nice. Didn't you know? Didn't you know? We're wonderful. We certainly are. We're magnificent. But no matter how nice and wonderful and magnificent we are, we still have all these immature spots in us. And they keep adding up and adding up, you know. And then all of a sudden, there's just enough to have this explosion where the negative meditations that we've had, the time has come for them to flower. And so they flower. And it's foolish if we start looking for what is it that I did yesterday or the day before. What we better do is start looking at what has been more or less habitual that we seem to get away with for so long. We're not going to get away with it all the time, not unless we change it. That's one thing has always comforted me. We can get away with it, really, if we start right now to overthrow those patterns before they have a chance to catch up with us. The trouble is, though, you see, the farther you go along on the path, you've probably noticed it, the more quickly does catastrophe catch up with you whenever you are negative. You've noticed it, haven't you? Because, you see, you've been intensifying yourselves. The tarot has been intensifying you. All occult work intensifies you. And it speeds up your evolution. And, of course, most people get sped up in evolution without having enough other help, so that they have an even worse time of it quite often. But it pays to decide to really work at it with all your might and main now, because considering the rapidity of the revolutions that go on in us as aspirants, our comeuppances will catch up. But of course, that's how we learn. If they do, they turn out to be the best things that could have happened to us. That's how we learn discrimination. That's how we get direct perception into the power of the mental, emotional attitudes. That's how we develop compassion. When we've been through hell ourselves, that's when we really can feel for the other person. And in the final analysis, it is all good. Just as we read to you from the Book of Tokens, every seeming failure is not a failure. It's part of the process that rounds us out, that deepens us, that brings the beauty into our hearts, flowing up through our hearts and eyes and mouths and fingertips, because of knowing that, and knowing with our hearts, that not one human being can be in pain, that it does not also affect us, because that is myself, everyone, after all. Any other questions? Yes?
Well, I noticed that you go to the same Sophiris a couple of times. In other words, you go to
Several times, from each path that connects it from a...
And is there a different, in other words, is there a different aspect of that Sophiris?
That's correct. Different connection. Each one, you see, each one of these Sephiroth have their various connections. And the one we're discussing tonight has 3 connections. One directly to the physical plane, physical body. One directly to the subconsciousness, that's the violet circle. And one directly to the intellect, which is reciprocal. They influence each other back and forth very consistently.
Physical, sometimes it's mental.
That's right. And there's more too. Don't forget there are the paths above, which we haven't taken up. There's a continuous inflow from those higher levels taking place all the time down that whole tree. Don't forget we are expressions for that one Yekida, the indivisible, the Lord, the one Lord, one and one alone, blessed be his holy name, in the final analysis. But we're taking up the myriad aspects of our own complex evolution and our return to that awareness and the conscious powers of that one. Any other questions? Yes?
What is the proper attitude for the hypocrites between the extremes of those who titillate for commercial reasons and those who, on the other hand, tend to repress our return?
Well, the occultist smiles at both of them. And very definitely, the minute he sees all these, shall we call them black magic, because that's what they are, you know. It's just, this culture is just rampant with black magic in this country, shouting at us from the radio, from the TVs, from the movies. I mean, every negative thing under the sun. Go see your doctor because you're the 1 out of 4 who might have the cancer, you know, or whatever. Don't run to your nearest physician to be cut open. Are you sniffling? And they show you, they present you with the picture and with the hacking, and then they give you beautiful little glass pictures of the inside and the chemistries and all the terrible things that you should expect will happen. Well, the occultist, and then again, in terms of the question you asked, all of these things are the same. The occultist has to learn to have an impregnable mind and impregnable emotions when it comes to anything that is the negative suggestion, or in the negative suggestion realm, and to be able to recognize it the moment it's presenting and throw it out. That's part of your tower there, to just keep throwing it out as fast as it comes, because, you know, the occultist feels pretty much this way. Be not the first by whom the new is tried, nor yet the last to lay the old aside. In other words, a good, discriminating, objective, happy medium in all things, and yet an ability to recognize that which we don't want and to keep it out. Any other questions? Yes?
In transmuting these negative emotions when you catch them, how do you decide which symbol to catch? There are 32 paths, the 10 spheres, and
when you become completely at home with that whole tree, and you will if you work on it, it isn't really difficult. When you become completely familiar with it, you'll find that automatically your higher self will put the proper symbol right into your mind.
I sort of have phases, I find. I was wondering.
There are times, but it'll just automatically put the proper one in your mind once you've become familiar with all of them. And until then, you just sort of hunt around in your mind. You see a negative emotion, you nip it in the bud, and you say, wait. And you say, now which... See? And then you say, now which symbol shall I use? Well, you've kept it from continuing to go negative by just telling it to wait, by waggling your finger at it while you hunt for that which you think will help you.
Well, I tend to go in cycles. I'll go for maybe 2 weeks or a month just on one key, and then I suddenly decide, well, I feel like this other one.
If it works for you, fine. Utilize it that way. Think them through. And you'll find as time goes on, more and more, you'll know just the ones you need. We have time for just one more question. Okay, now we have time for no questions.